All right, we can go ahead and get started. And as always, this will be recorded, so you can go back and watch it, or if you have to dip out, that is perfectly okay. We're going to be talking about red flags today, and we're calling this a workshop, so it might run a little bit longer than our seminars normally do, where that's only what, you know, we try to keep those to 15 to 30 minutes at most. So this could run a little bit longer. I'm not for sure. And then it's going to be a little bit more interactive. So to start, go ahead and, if you have ActionFlow, go ahead and open to your ActionFlow and go to the dashboard. And if you've set up red flags, I mean, maybe if you set them up and everyone's doing great, you won't see any red flags on this daily monitor. But if you have set up the red flags and nobody's perfect, you might see a few red flags on here. And you can go to the red flags report. There's a big button here to go to the red flags report, and you would also see red flags if it's set up here. If you don't see any red flags, then that most likely means you don't have that set up, and that is what we're going to do today. I'm going to put in the chat. Later, we're going to have a little what's it called? A little activity, or activity is probably not the right word. I'm going to have you use a piece of paper and fill something out. It's pretty easy, but I'm going to put it's a PowerPoint, but think of it, it's like a worksheet. So I'm putting that in the chat now, if it goes over there. Yeah, let's see. No, it actually looks like maybe I thought I could send files to everybody. Let's see, share files. Okay, yeah, it's in the meeting. There's a section called files, and you can download that document. I think if you just have a piece of paper, that will do as well. And I'll have this worksheet accessible later, but we'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. So this is the red flags training and setup. And today the goals will be to better understand how red flags work. I think we all have a decent understanding of what this means, but within ActionFlow, I'll explain exactly what that means in ActionFlow. We'll identify 3 key red flags in your shop, and then we're going to go ahead and the goal is to get these implemented in your shop today as part of the workshop. As most of you know, we have this concept of processes, which basically says a lot of times the majority of your jobs are cycling through the same steps every time. And so we call this your job process, and we configure it at the beginning of your account, and we tweak it. But the idea is that this should accurately capture the process that you go through. So this is just a sample, a very basic process. We'll say that on day 1, you receive a job approval, and we have a concept called do now list. So the idea is you have these different actions in your process. So there's different steps in your process, and you have different employees who will handle those steps. So we have Grace, who's a sales rep, Kyle's a templater, Kim's a fabricator, and Alicia is an installer. So on day 1, on Monday, Grace comes into the shop and she says that she sees that she has received job approval on her list. So when she completes that, it drops off her do now list. The idea is she did it and she doesn't need to worry about it. Day 3 rolls around and Kyle is our templater, and he sees a template action pop up on his do now list. He completes it, and we move on. Then you might go ahead and schedule the install, and Alicia won't see that action on her do now list until day 7. But on day 5, our fabricator will see the fabricate action on her list, and then once day 7 rolls around, Alicia will have the install action and she'll complete it. So this is the ideal scenario for a very basic process. The idea of a do now list is there are all these tasks but some of them need to be done today, some of them need to be done tomorrow, and some of them need to be done later. A do now list says I just need to complete what needs to be done today, and I don't need to worry about all the tasks that need to be done otherwise, and I don't need to ActionFlow sorts those for me. Within ActionFlow, we have these and on the dashboard there's a do now actions graph, and this was an example from a real client. And the idea is, you know, if people are keeping up with this list, I think they can get up to 20 or 25, but if people are really keeping up with their list, at the end of the day, it should be at 0, or at least it should be less than 20. If someone usually has more than 30 or 40, it most likely means they're either not keeping up with it, or it might not be accurate enough. We had a situation where someone had a lot of receive final payment, and they said, well, I'm not ready to receive the final payment because I need to send an invoice. And we said, all right, well, let's make your process more accurate so that it so that those actions get pushed off to when they're supposed to be pushed off. And this was our simple example, and now we're going to run through a problem example. So day 4 rolls around and the template still hasn't been completed. So it was supposed to be completed 2 days after the job approval, but it's 3 days now and it hasn't been completed. In the same way, the install fabricate is supposed to happen 2 days before the install, but it's now the day before and we still haven't fabricated. So in both of those situations, we would say that is a red flag. There's a problem and we need to address it. So we're going to jump into a better understanding of how red flags are implemented in ActionFlow, but a few key points. Red flags shouldn't replace your do now list. The idea of a do now list is every job has these actions, and in 90-95% of your situations, the do now list, people should be checking those off, and everything should be running smoothly. So red flags are meant to alert you to when something is kind of, you might have a regular due date, I might call it the soft due date, that's the do now list, and red flag means this is a major problem and we need to step in and address it right now. So it's easy to want to create too many red flags, but we really want to pick, today we're going to really think about what are the most, what are some issues that happen in your shop that have the most monetary and scheduling impact. And so we want to kind of focus on 2 or 3 of those. So again, I'm going to run through another example to just get our minds into the right framework. Day 1 happened, and these are all of our customers over here. So I have 5 customers, and on day 1, job approval happened. So I think that was me as the sales rep. So great. I called all my people and they were approved. On day 3, 2 customers had the template happen. Rosa and Sam had the template happen. But on day 4 rolled around, and ActionFlow threw up a red flag because we would say the template action should have happened 2 days after job approval. But if it's uncompleted 3 days, we're calling that a red flag. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and have you either you can download that PowerPoint I attached, or you can get a piece of paper out and I'll show you. I'll show you what that PowerPoint looks like. What we're going to do is you can just draw 4 lines on a piece of paper. And the first line is going to be a little bit longer. The 2 middle lines are for days, so they're a little bit shorter, and the 4th line is a little bit longer for an action. So just put 4 lines on your paper. And again, normal days. So this is the normal amount of time that you expect an action to be completed. And then there might be a buffer. You might know that our salespeople will email out a confirmation about when the template will happen, but sometimes that might take them 1 or 2 days. So there might be a kind of a expected buffer, but you want to get at the very end of that buffer. So it's a timing, you have to be we can tweak the timing, because sometimes if you don't give enough of a buffer, you might get all sorts of red flags that aren't actually red flags. It's just a little bit slow for one reason or another. So we want to think about the kind of what is that hard deadline when it's a major problem. So go ahead and just think about an action that happens after your sale. You might call it a sale or a job order or an accepted estimate. So what's a second action that has to happen after a job order? So in this case, I said after a job order, we need to schedule a template. So in the example, I have job order on the first line, and on the second line, I have a schedule template. And then what's the normal number of days for that action to be completed? So I said normally 2 days for scheduling template. I'll give them 2 days. And then on the other line, write down the number of red flag days. So in this example, I use 3, but you may have, maybe you would give it 4 days, or maybe in your example, you're using something that's, 4 days to 7 days. So think of what would you consider the red flag, the problematic number of days. And then I'll go ahead and give everyone maybe 2 minutes to go after you've worked through that first example. Go ahead and come up with another example. And again, think of something that is an issue that kind of causes you the most heartache in your business. So go ahead and do, I think, one other action. And feel free you can put it in the chat if you have questions, or if you have thought of a really great example that you want to share with the group, you're welcome to do that as well. But we'll give it a couple minutes to go ahead and add in to do this exercise twice. Okay, so now we're going to go to what we call future target. So this is generally or is always in relation to some sort of install date. So that could be an install, it could be a delivery, it could be a pickup. But the idea is this is in relation, a future target is in relation to an install. And it's kind of opposite of the past trigger. So your install happens on Friday. You know that we need to be cutting those tops on Monday. So that's 4 days. And if we're cutting on Wednesday, that's a problem. So maybe your normal days would be 4 and your red flag days would be 2. Maybe programming's another example. Programming needs to happen at least 7 business days, and if we get to 4 days, then we're in a real bind. So we're going to do the same thing. So draw out 4 more lines, and your first action, so you're on the 4th line, put install, and then your first action, whatever you want to, as an example, you'll put that on the 1st line. Your normal number of days is again on the 2nd line, and then your red flag days is on the 3rd line. And then I'll give another minute to, so do an example with install, and then pick one other one that you think could be useful. And some people have more of these related to install, and some people really only have those past triggers, as we said, as you're kind of moving forward in your process. So if you're not sure this works for you, that's okay too. All right. Now we're going to, go ahead and open up ActionFlow. If you have it, if you have a second screen, or if you have one screen, maybe you can try to put it all into one screen, but I can describe what we're going to do if you need to just look at ActionFlow. So open up ActionFlow and pull out that past trigger example. So that was where you had job order, and in my example, I had schedule template. And I'm going to have you open ActionFlow and go to processes, and then go find there's going to be a process that is your default process. And I know processes can be a little intimidating, so feel free to either to follow along with me now, or we can always help you get this set up later. But we won't be touching the actual where all the green process things are. So yeah, I think you can follow along if you feel comfortable. So pick the job. It's going to say job and then a semicolon and whatever the name of your default job is, and there'll be one with a checkbox. So in my example, the checkbox means it's the default job process. So find the standard or whatever your default job process is, and then we're going to go down to the action definitions grid in the bottom left. And then what I want you to do is find whatever that first action was. In my example, it was job order, but find your first action and scroll down to the first action in the action definitions grid. And then what I'm going to have you do is scroll to the right, and you're going to find the column called text label, and you're going to put your second action in the text label box. And then you're going to scroll more to the right and find the past trigger red flag days, and that's where you're going to put the red flag days in the action definitions grid. So again, I'll just repeat that. First, you go find the action definitions grid, and you find your first action, and you find that row. So in my example, it was job order. You scroll to the right, text label, and then you put your second action in the text label column of the first action row. The red flag days in the past trigger red flag days column. And then I'm going to have you, this is a just kind of a second small action. Well, I'll explain what it does later. You're going to actually scroll back to the left, and in the checkbox label column, you'll type ignore red flag. All right, and now we're going to run through future target. And again, we can always help, and we'll put all these materials out there for future use. So now pull out your future target list or lines, and this time we're going to find your first action in the action definitions list. In my case, it was finish. And then you're going to scroll to the right to future target red flag days, and you're going to put the red flag days there. Because this is always, future targets are always in relation to some sort of install action, we don't actually need to tell it that. ActionFlow already knows that this is related to whatever your install target date is. So in this case, you find the first action row, and then you put your future target red flag days into that future target red flag days column. And then again, scroll back to the left and go to the checkbox label and type in ignore red flag. All right, so now that we have this set up, just a few different ways where we can see how this impacts us is in the daily monitor, the red flags report, and then I'll talk about how we can do something about it once we have these red flags. So I'm going to switch over into my action flow. So what's pretty neat is if you follow along with my exercise there, if you hit the refresh button, and if you go to red flags report, you should now see some red flags. In this case, they were already set up. And in your case, you may say, well, wait a minute, I'm seeing way too many. I know there's a reason these are red flags. So there's always a tweaking process that we can go through, but you'll see red flags on your red flags report and also on your daily monitor. So this daily monitor, for those who, it's a little bit new, so I'll just explain it again. On this top left, we have a plot right here. It's called installs. And on the far right, we have installs today. Then we have installs tomorrow. The yellow zone is installs in 2 to 3 days, and green zone is installs in 4 to 5 days. And this means, this can always be a little bit confusing. It's either a red flag job or a non-red flag job. So in this case, there's 2 total installs today. One's a red flag and one is not. So this doesn't mean there's only one job and it has a red flag. There's 2 installs today. And with accepted jobs, this is anything that has a template that's farther out than a week. And then the template plot either shows templates today or upcoming templates. So this can be a really easy way to just focus on, I mean, installs are scheduled and we have an issue. So this can be a really nice way to just make sure kind of on a daily basis that if there are any red flags, we're addressing it. These are our high priority red flags. So again, you could go to the red flag report, or you could scroll down and we have these active job lists. And the only way for all of this to work is if people are completing their do now actions. If people aren't completing their do now actions, then these aren't going to be updated. But once these are updated, then we can see here's my 2 installs for today. So this one is ready to go. But it looks like if you look at this far right column, this finish is not done for this job, and our install is supposedly at noon today and it's not finished. And this is our demo account, so I don't want anyone to have any heart attacks for the sake of poor ABC countertops. But this is Ashley, and she has, this customer name is Ashley, and the job is not finished. And then actually, if we look ahead, the install tomorrow also has problems with finish, and install in 2 to 3 days has issues with the edging. So that would be considered a problem. So what you could do is if you click Ashley, you can go straight to the job. And now there's different ways. Maybe the way you manage this is you go into the shop and you figure out what's going on with the finish station, but you could, from ActionFlow, do a few things. You could send a urgent message. So I could do a message, check urgent, and say, figure out the finish problem. And you could send that to your coworker. So maybe I'll send that to Rob. And then if we go to Rob's list, he now has a urgent message that will show up at the top of his list. You could, yeah, so you could send a message, you could talk to someone within your shop. So this is short-term ways to address this. Something else that may happen, I have an example down here. So in my accepted jobs list, and this, we had a little bit of an error, so we're going to get it fixed, but I'll show you what it's intended to do. So in this example, I have this scheduled template that's supposed to happen. But if I go here, and Roderick gave us this example, a lot of times someone might be waiting on cabinets, or there might be a reason that the template is not scheduled yet. So you could add an action that you could add a comment that says we're waiting on cabinets, and you could push this out. And then what you would do is you would go over here and you'd find where it says ignore red flag, and you would check this. And we're having a little bit of an issue that we'll figure out, but when this works, when you click that ignore red flag box, that it will drop off the red flag list, and it will this will turn to the normal background. So those are a couple short-term ways within ActionFlow to address red flags. Again, you can always go talk to somebody, but longer term, if in an ideal world, red flags should be the exception. They shouldn't be the rule. So if you're seeing, what if we don't want to be, just leave that off. Just If that often we answered in the process. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's true. Natasha just asked a question. She said, what if we don't want them to be able to be ignored? Do we just not add the ignore red flag check box? And yeah, you could do that. I think you might find some scenarios where it's just an odd scenario, and you would need to ignore it, but you could always go back and ignore it, or you can just make a mental note of it. But yeah, I mean, you're welcome to not make it obvious how to ignore red flags. That makes sense. So yeah, you would just not add that last box. But if you notice, the red flag report can be helpful. If you notice the same red flag coming up over and over again, then you know that's something you can maybe address long term, whether that's a conversation with somebody or just trying to, it's a nice way to know where you can tweak your process. So let me go back to the presentation. So short term, and then I just step this. Okay, so, okay, great. We're at 30 minutes. So the goal was to better understand red flags, identify key red flags, and then implement them. And I know we moved fast, so and I set aside a lot of time. So if anyone has questions, we can even take time to okay, yeah, we can take time to look at some specific situations. Let's see, Natasha Jenkins. Natasha, do you mind? Or yeah, I guess Reese is typing. I mean, we could maybe jump into that. Okay, great. Natasha brought up a specific example, and then Reese is going to look at that specific job. So if anyone has, or if Roderick or Reese have any other follow-up thoughts.
Grace, this is Roderick. The only comment I'd make is this really only works if you follow the process from beginning to end. But if you and your team is kind of in the habit of jumping around because you want to jumpstart a job in a different area and move forward from there, then you probably will find some of these red flags are red flags that are happening, but you have no control over them because they're in the rearview mirror. So the success of this really is following the process from beginning to end and let the natural course of the process do its thing. Now, if you find that you have many red flags, that could be an example of maybe the process is not correct, doesn't really follow what you're doing today, or the red flags are too early, too often, things of that nature. So I have a number of customers as well that red flags are in the rearview mirror, and all I can do right now is go back and see that certain parts of the process were missed, and I have to fake it to basically fix that status and get that red flag to disappear that was way in the rearview mirror, and the job is well past that point. So it's really important to let the jobs follow through with the normal process, and then that will really make a big difference in the success of the red flags.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Roderick. All right, well, yeah, we'll wrap it up, and I'll post this shortly.
Thanks, Grace.
Everyone. Thanks.